One of the intriguing things about Imam Gulen's teaching, to me as a student of Buddhism and Hinduism, which have a very heavy emphasis philosophically on getting rid of ego or nafs, is how strongly that's emphasized in Imam Gulen's teaching. In Turkey, since the Republic. So in that case, I mean, you know, and my sense of how Hizmet activities connect Turkey to the world is very strong. To touch Turkish. Well, my name is Peter Kovach. I'm a retired American diplomat. I've worked largely in the Muslim world. I'm also an interfaith activist. I believe in not only dialogue, but social action coming from cooperation for the common good. In my career, I have been one to reach out to religious civil society wherever I've worked, and I'm very comfortable with that. In other lives, I've been a university adjunct, and I've taught religion, world religion. I've taught public diplomacy, and I've taught conflict resolution. I was the Department of State's diplomat in residence in Los Angeles, California, when I first ran into the Pacifica Institute, which is the Hizmet dialogue affiliate in Southern California. I'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of Mr. Gulen. But I was intrigued, and I was intrigued because the two people saying, you should get to know this organization. One was a Shia Muslim who is, I would say, a public intellectual, well known in the United States, and the other was a Jewish rabbi. And I said, oh, how interesting. So I started going to events. As it turns out, their offices were a 3-minute walk from my apartment, so this was very convenient. I was very delighted by what I found there and the associations I made there. I was invited to speak on things that I supposedly know something about. I did that a few times and became a friend of Hizmet. When I came back to Washington, I immediately got in touch with the Rumi Forum, that's the Hizmet dialogue affiliate in the Mid-Atlantic. And eventually I was asked to join the advisory council, which I very happily did. By this time I've read much more of Mr. Gulen's works. I've gotten to know much more about the diversity of activity that occurs under Hizmet. And I have to say that my comfort level has gotten higher and higher the more I learn about this movement. What I liked about Hizmet, I have done interfaith dialogue in a number of contexts, formally and informally, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful first step because what it does is it involves the intentions of partners on all sides. And once you've set the intention and you've decided to get over your prejudices or discomfort with the other, then dialogue starts. But I guess my question has always been, being a fairly active person and type A, so what? So you're talking. What is there out there? And what Hizmet does is it answers that question in a huge chorus of meaningful activity. Educational foundations inspired by Mr. Gulen's teachings in 160 countries, including my own. Clinics and service organizations, and I've seen Kimse Yokmu projects in several countries. I am impressed with Tuscan, even though I'm not personally a business person or an entrepreneur. I'm a strong believer in private enterprise and its impact on development, and I mean human development and social development. So I think it's very important. And then media, which is extremely important in this world. And what impresses me again, in summary, about Hizmet is that it's an activist movement, and it extends to these 5 very vital spheres of social interaction. My views of Fethullah Gulen, obviously I got involved with these organizations, and I was very interested in the teacher behind them. And since I studied religion in university, I began to read his works. And I, being American, very critical, we're critical reasoning people, as Mr. Gulen would have us be. I said, well, what's not to like about this? And I was looking for things not to like about it. And I have never found that, because he takes, and I wish I could give you the quote, and I don't know if it's from the Sunnah or the Hadith or the Quran. There is a quote that talks about a true religion taking the teachings and interpreting it for the reality in the current historical moment. And I would say that Mr. Gulen's teachings embody that. His view on the compatibility of science and religion, for one thing, I think is enlightened across the board. I mean, I'm not talking about intra-Islam or just Islam and Christianity. I'm talking about in every religion, because there's a complementarity that he puts out there, that science is, capitalizes on the greatest gift that God or Allah has given us, which is rationality and critical thinking. And it helps us interpret religion in the present moment, and religion keeps science ethical. It keeps science within ethical bounds, so you don't get these mad scientists inventing doomsday machines that will benefit them and no one else. I mean, to be crude, but that's the example. One of the intriguing things about Imam Gulen's teaching, to me as a student of Buddhism and Hinduism, which have a very heavy emphasis philosophically on getting rid of ego or nafs, is how strongly that's emphasized in Imam Gulen's teaching. And in my own personal study, right now, I study a lot the Mathnavi lately in Islam. And I study in Christianity the wisdom tradition, a lot of these gospels that were found in Egypt to the year I was actually born, 1945, and which teach eradication of the ego centrally. I think that is a central teaching. And I mean the idea of dedicating yourself to social service, which I think is the most compelling in my value system of the 5 elements of Hizmet, is a kind of ego abnegation. Yes, you could go into corporate life in Turkey or America or Russia or wherever and make millions of dollars and be rich and be comfortable. Or yes, you could be a professor and write great books in your name and maybe get media attention, and boy, your ego would be, really puffed up. You're the person that people turn to in your field. But when you can serve and you get that energy, not only from the other human beings that you're in interaction with, either whether it's in dialogue or service or education, through teaching, or even in enterprise, but through them, it's Allah's light that's shining on you. And it's because there's nothing in the way. There's no ego in the way. Yes, you'd like things to turn out a certain way when you get up in the morning. I mean, we're all human after all. But the person that's let go of nafs says, and okay, if it doesn't turn out this way, I'll take a deep breath and move on to the next moment. I mean, teaching the basic values of the religion from the literature, from the Holy Quran and from the Hadith and the Sunnah, are core values in Islam in particular. That's very important. But I think the teaching of his that creates the big umbrella, both in the United States and overseas where I've seen Hizmet activity, is the idea that God's greatest gift to us, Allah's greatest gift, is rationality. Its ability to take a great tradition like Islam or Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism, etc., and interpret it in light of the reality of the moment. And to do a moment by moment, if you will, that's a little exaggerated, but a rationality in this historical moment, and turn it into meaningful social action and educational endeavor and encouragement of enterprise and media activity. I mean, I think that is pretty amazing, and that's something that people can sign up to. And I think that, frankly, it probably, in my country, and I really can only speak on this level as an American, it probably attracts people that are identified with some spiritual tradition more simply because, wow, here's Islam. And, you know, since 9/11, Islam has a mixed name in this country. Here's Islam, and Islam has this social, civil society platform that is rational, that's modern, and that's comprehensive. So, wow. I mean, so I think psychologically for an American that gets involved, there are two things happening. One is, wow, you know, since 9/11, there's been all this discussion about Islam. All our interfaith movements are very, as I say, Islamocentric. They won't admit it, but they are. And here I am with a group of like-minded Muslims looking at the future through the lens of our own religious traditions. I think that's very powerful. Let me talk a little bit about what attracts Americans in particular to Hizmet activities, because I really can speak as an American most authoritatively. Look, after 9/11, Islam became very much the focus of people involved in interfaith activity. And, you know, is this religion represented by violent extremists? No, it isn't. As a matter of fact, Imam Gulen teaches that, I don't know what word he uses, but a violent extremist is not a Muslim, and Muslims are not violent extremists. And I think that there's a lot of comfort, I think, especially of Americans who have an identity, no matter if they're religious or not, with a tradition, to find all of a sudden a Muslim social movement, civil society movement, that is so given to rationality as a form of worship. God's greatest gift, Allah's greatest gift, is the rational mind, and when we use it, we are worshiping. And I think that that's a very compelling idea in this society, where, you know, there's less of a line between church and state. We don't have a state religion. We're so different, and maybe there's less of a danger here than in a more monolithic society where there's predominantly one religion. But I think people of some identity are very comfortable with Hizmet, simply because it takes that rationality and it applies, and it brings people together in dialogue. And from that dialogue, they in turn begin to support education, social development and relief work, enterprise, which I would argue is the true engine of development, and media, and responsible media. That's a pretty powerful package.
The linking of peace and justice and education and all of those good works with spirituality, that if there isn't that spiritual foundation, it's not nearly as effective.
You know, one of the emphasis in Imam Gulen's teachings that I think really underlies a lot of the work of the dialogue organizations and education, social service, media, business, is this idea that all humans are fundamentally alike, and that the ultimate membership in this world created by God, or Allah, is human.